mean, every day he's around with me, and it's so cool.
When I would go to New York, I would meet Joe, and we always went to Ben Ash Delicatessen across the street from the Cantors, because he didn't want to pull the crowds of Cantors. Carnegie. I had my coats mixed up. And he'd always say to me, bring in Carol, my girlfriend. And I'd say, yeah. And he'd stop and buy a flower for her on the way. Yep. And he'd walk over from his place. That was always very charming.
Let me just add one thing to that sort of gives a perspective on Joe. We were walking over, Al Roker's office was near Joe's apartment, and we were walking over to meet with Al Roker one day. And we're walking across the street, and walking the other way across 8th Avenue was a very elegant-looking woman. And you had just about the right amount of time to pass when all of a sudden, just to the air, Joe said, "I love women." And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is it was just great. I loved everything.
And women love Joe.
Oh, yeah.
Who else wants to say something about Joe? Michael.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I met Joe Simon in 1965 for the first time. I was 14 years old. I was doing writing for some of the early fanzines. And since I lived in New Jersey within striking distance of New York, I would head up to whether it was DC, Marvel, any of the old smaller groups. And Joe at that time was the editor of the Harvey Action line of comics. If you remember, things like Piranha and B-Man and Spy-Man. And he sat patiently with actually two 14-year-old boys and told us the entire history of comics. He said, I am going to be presenting to you boys and your entire generation a new comic book that I hope you've heard of, and we didn't. It was called The Spirit. He brought back the spirit for a generation of baby boomers who had just not been exposed to that before. And that, if there's no other contribution Joe ever made to the comic book industry, that one was absolutely incredible. And fighting American. And while we were there, he shared with us the story of how he broke Stan Lee into the business. Now, Joe was very witty, very funny, very dry. And he said, yeah, he goes, I was the editor at Timely for Martin Goodman. It was like 1939, and there's this kid in the office. He's like 16 years old, 17 years old. We have him pushing a broom, cleaning the place up. He said, but he was the most annoying little kid in the world. He said he had this thing, it was like he called it a mouth harp. And he said he would be there playing this instrument, driving Jack Kirby out of his mind, annoying the shit out of them all. And he was ready to throw him out. He says, but I couldn't because he was related to the publisher. And he said, so instead I found another way to keep him quiet. I started giving him text pieces to write. And he started writing Captain America text pieces. And of course what Joe then did was he gave us Stan Lee. And that was just one of many, many contributions Joe made. I had a chance to spend a lot of time with him, even well into his late 90s. He never lost the boyhood passion for comics. He never lost his interest in comics. And nobody could tell a story like him. And if he thought today would be a sad thing or it would be a depressing thing, he would kick all of our butts really, really good. And yeah, I think we should remember him for his great contributions and changed comic book history for all of us. And that's reflected now in movies and TV. And when you stop to think that Captain America now is probably more popular than he ever was before, it's a lasting testament to Joe and Jack, what they created, the timelessness of what they created, and how they will be remembered for so many more generations to come.
I agree about Joe wanting to celebrate. The night before he passed, I was over there and we were talking about Occupy Wall Street and all sorts of stuff. And the weekend before, Dana was over there sitting with him, and he's looking around going, yeah, we got a real industry going here. Because he was so proud that he was still working until pretty much the day he passed away. And by the way, I saw Stan a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him specifically what it was, and Stan explained it was an ocarina.
One of the last times I talked to Joe, well, actually not that close, but we were talking about Al Hirschfeld, because I had sat for, I got to sit for Al Hirschfeld, and he did a caricature, and we were talking about that. And Joe said to me, you know, I always respected Al Hirschfeld. I always thought I really respect him, especially now. And I say, because he's a great caricaturist? And he said, no, because when he was 96 years old, he sued his agent. you learn nothing else from watching these guys, and Stan Lee is as good an example as any, don't get old. I mean, these guys are active. I love the fact that Jerry was so active, and that Jerry was plotting new things, and Joe was plotting new projects. I mean, these are guys who went out with things, with best-selling books out, and went out with new projects coming out, and you know, you heard they passed, and think, oh, damn it, now they're not going to get to see this new one come out. That's the part of the story. Who else wants to throw it out?
I wanted, of course,
let's Tony go first.
like everyone else who loves Simon-Kirby's work, I was always absolutely enchanted by Fighting America, one of the most brilliant comic books ever done. But I wanted to say about Joe Simon, I mean, he and Kirby, so many breakthroughs. We think of them as superheroes, but they did the very first Love comics, they did some of the early crime comics, they did the horror comics, and Black Magic. And when I started with DC in 1974, Joe was one of the editors. And he did a lot of really oddball, off-the-wall things. He'd done, of course, Brother Power the Geek a few years earlier. He did Prez about a teenage president. He, did Green Team and a lot of things that were totally different and not, so much of comic books are derivative of, what's selling at other companies. Joe was always looking in new areas. The other thing I have to point out, and it was something Neil Adams stressed at the memorial service for Jerry Robinson, was that Jerry Robinson and Joe Simon and also Will Eisner all loved comics. They were all giants in comics, but they all had lives also outside of comics. And they were, in the case of Joe Simon, I mean, he was a businessman, which a lot of artists are not. He was an editor, he was a publisher at times, he was an artist. But Steve and I have talked before, and Joe did everything like Eisner. Packaged.
Yes.
He had a sense of business that few artists had.
Yeah, Jerry, Joe, and Will were just astonishing at what they could do.
And they didn't limit themselves to comic books. Yet they never, a lot of people start in comic books and then move out and do other commercial work or newspaper strips or advertising. And they kind of forget comics. And no matter where they were working, Jerry Robinson and Joe Simon retained their love of comic books. But they weren't limited. They had the talent to expand outside and have multifaceted careers.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what's cool is Joe did that all his life. He did the work in politics, he did the work in advertising, he had paintings appear in supplements to the New York Times. But what's really interesting with Joe is that he actually started working in newspapers. He went to do photo retouching at a Rochester Hearst paper, and they discovered that he could write, that he could cartoon, that he could do illustrations for fiction. And before he was done, he was doing a little bit of everything. He was hanging out with Max Baer and just astonishing folks. And then he went out to New York and was doing advertising work and just illustration. And this one guy said to him, there's this new business starting, and I know this guy. Why don't you go talk to him? He's doing this new thing. It's called comic books. And that's how he got in. But he got in because he had done all of this other stuff with just a high school education.
Yeah, if you look at the early Simon-Kirby work, or actually any of the Simon-Kirby work, one of the things that you can see if you look at this is that this is done by people who do something other than comics. And that's what one of the things Joe brought to the team. The graphics, the cover design, especially the Simon-Kirby had the most striking splash pages in the business. And a lot of that was Joe's understanding of typefaces, design elements, because he had done something other than comics in his life, which was not true of a lot of the other comic people.
I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a piece that he did for a one-issue, sort of a risque magazine that Martin Goodman was putting out. And this is a beautiful painted piece that he did that is sort of the secret order of hot stuff, too. But, I mean, come on up afterwards and I'll be glad to show it to you. But
or better still, buy a copy of the damn book.
I'm not going to argue with that. But the fact is that he was a brilliant illustrator. And some of his best stuff, I thought, was illustration outside of the comic books. He was a good storyteller, but he was a fabulous illustrator.
We have about 5 more minutes to talk about Joe exclusively. Who wants to? Charlie, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was very lucky. I lived 3 doors down from Joe in the city. When I was at DC Comics, I didn't know Joe at all. And it was so many times we would walk past his apartment. I'm like, oh, I should ring the bell and introduce myself. And I didn't. I was with an artist that I worked with who was a huge fan. And we stood down outside for about an hour. Should we? And when Mark Evanier and I worked on Mark's Kirby King of Comics, he reprinted, obviously, a lot of Joe Simon stuff and Simon-Kirby stuff. And there was a Fighting American story in there that was complete, that was off the original art. And we had this idea that we would do a book of all the original art. And he's got tons of it, as Steve knows. You know, the house was filled with all this original art and issues that had been printed, 3rd issues of a series that had been canceled after 2. And, you know, I sit here on the Joe side with a lot of regrets, which is my regret that I didn't get to move fast enough and do the book. I sort of, unfortunately, you know, he's 98, and somehow I took that for granted. And, you know, as Mark was saying in the beginning, every year we lose more and more. And, you know, on the Jerry side, I'm really fortunate I got to do the Ambassador Comics book, and we can talk more about that in a minute, but I was able to relish every moment. And with Joe, the moments were few and far between, and we would go to his apartment, my wife and I, go see him, and he was just so warm and so inviting. I remember I brought this really bad Captain America plush toy that I had gotten at a convention, and I was going to have him sign it, and he was so excited to see it. I didn't have the heart to sign it, and he just kept it. I was like, oh no, it's for you. He was so happy. But yeah, unfortunately, you know, even in '98, you just thought that Joe was going to be here forever. There was never a moment where you didn't think that he was going to be 100 or 100 or whatever. He was smart. He was so in the moment. He was total recall. That's the thing that I am amazed by Jerry and Joe, is that they could recall events and information and art. They could look at a piece of art, he knew who inked it, and he knew, you know, the circumstances of it. That's really remarkable, and I'm really proud that I got to know him. But again, regretful that I didn't do the book while he was around to enjoy it.
Can I just say one last thing, Mark?
Okay.
Okay. I got to say that, I mean, he really did enjoy talking to you, Charlie. And as a matter of fact, he always said wonderful things about you, Mark, once he realized who you were. So,
usually it's the other way around.
it was great. But one thing is that we're going to be using some of that original art to reproduce science fiction stories by Kirby, Williamson, Randall, Torres in the upcoming book, which is going to be kind of neat. So it's not going to go completely unused. But the other thing is that, I think the proudest thing now, I used to take him stuff all the time. I used to take him Captain America business card holders and plush toys. I would never come back from a convention without taking him a present. And it's tough right now because I see them at the conventions. Excuse me. And I can't take them to them. But one of the last things I took him was one of those little frisbees that you can get now with the Captain America shield with a little handle on it. Mm-hmm. And his family told me that it's in the casket. And I love that. Sorry.
Anyway, Paul, Batton, you want to say anything? Joe, anything to add?
Just very quickly, the thing I noticed about Simon is that he was like Eisner in the sense of at the end of the day, and the bottom line were that they loved the shop talk. That you saw them really, their eyes light up when they just talk about the nuts and bolts of a cartoonist trade. Just very, very quickly, one of my first conventions as a professional was a 1990 Fred Greenberg convention in New York, and I had my little dog and pony show, and I said, Joe Simon had a setup. He had just come out with the first version of his autobiography, so of course I wanted to buy a copy, and he autographed it for me. And I just mentioned, I said, you know, I've always tried to imitate the hay. Now, for anyone who knows Simon-Kirby's work, the hay is this particular technique that Simon would ink, that it wasn't exactly a solid black, you know, and it wasn't exactly cross-hatching, but he called it the hay. So I had mentioned this to him, And he goes, you know about the hay? And I go, oh yeah, sure. and we were talking, I go, I don't know, I tried it with a ruler, and he goes, no, yeah, blah, blah, blah. All right, so shakes hand. Maybe an hour or two later, he comes walking over to Artist Alley where I am, and he goes, so what exactly is it what you do? And what type of pens do you, I told him about my strip, but what type of pens do you use? It was just general shop talk, and it was like a Woody Allen moment where I just turned to the audience and I went, I'm shop talking with Joe Simon. like he's a newbie as well. So I think that was a quality that he never was. He just really loved getting down and dirty with other cartoonists.
I had dinner with him and next week, Bill Eisner, with Joe. It was, Bill Eisner, and they were basically sitting there for an hour talking about various publishers that they had blackmail evidence on because they were screwing their luck. They had collected all this dirt on the business.
There are a few things we didn't put in here.
Yes. Jack used to tell this story about somebody that we're working with Simon, he was working with Joe, and somebody came over there and he mentioned the publisher of the company. He says, hey, did you hear he's keeping a 17-year-old girl over in a hotel over on, and Joe kind of went, make a little note for the front. Come in and do something. Paul, you want to put anything about Joe?
Well, I never had the pleasure of meeting Joe, but I was a huge admirer of his work. And one of the things that I marveled at early on was the amount of diversity that both he and Jack brought to their output. I mean, these are guys that everybody in comics could study from today, because I remember when I was first aware of them, I was in college. I was rooming with Richard Howell, and I was reading the old Simon-Kirby Captain Americas, and then I thought those were terrific. And then Richard said, "Have you ever read, the romance books?" I said, "Jack Kirby and Joe Simon did romance comics?" "No, of course they didn't." I said, "Yes, they did." And I was struck that the same, not only the same amount of craft, but the same amount of affection and intensity they put into Captain America was there in the romance books. And then Boys Ranch, which I think is one of the best series ever made. I fell in love with that, and I said, boy, this is all different, it's all good, and it's all really from the heart. And I think that is one of the most tremendous things about Simon and Kirby working together, is they brought that same amount of affection and passion and knowledge to everything they touch. Some of that was out of necessity with the shifting tastes in comics, but you could also see that whatever they tackled, they brought a lot of their talent and imagination to. And I think that's amazingly, that's rare and truly one of a kind. That's what I admire most about it.
I'll tell one last Joe Simon story here. Jack used to tell me a story about when they were doing the Young Romance books. It was a feature that ran for a number of issues called Nancy Hale. It was a 3-page filler reissue. It was an advice and love column. Nancy Hale was some sort of like, Dear Abby, Joyce Brothers type story. Somebody would come to her and say, my girlfriend doesn't understand me, or my husband, likes to eat tuna fish, or whatever the problem was with the moment. And Nancy would take care of it. And they were written and drawn by Mort Meskin for a long time. And Mort Meskin was the guy in the Simon-Kirby shop that they trusted the most and loved the most. And it was like Meskin would just say, do 3 pages of Nancy Hale, and Meskin would bring them in, and they'd pay him for Woody Wood. So Jack's getting ready to send an issue to press one day. Young Romance, he's flipping through and goes, okay, that story's fine. He comes to the Nancy Hale story, okay, that's Meskin, that's fine. And he goes a couple past it, he does a double take, he goes back, he looks at the Nancy Hale story, and this guy is coming to Nancy Hale and explaining that he can't get an erection. Well, maybe I can help you. And she starts ripping her clothes off, and they're having sex for the next 3 months. What? He runs into Joe and says, Joe, look at this. Joe was probably and they went over to Meskin, and it was in the next room, and they said, Mort, and he goes, oh, you finally looked at it. So Mort says, Mort pulls out, he's got another 3-pager he's done for real. And he says, send that one over to the Comics Code. I want to see the notes on it. No, we can't do send it over. No, please send. They argued for 10 minutes. Finally, okay, fine. I'm going to send it over to the Comics Code. They printed the other one. And nobody to this day knows what happens to the 3-pager. But a couple, a year or so later, when sales on Young Romance had plunged to the point where it was getting close to cancellation or was in a lot of trouble, Joe turned to Jack and said, you know what our big mistake was? We should have printed Meskin's story. So when I first met Joe, we were talking about different things. Then we get one line, and finally I said, tell me about the Mort Meskin Nancy Hale story. He lit up and he went, oh, we should have printed that story. It was great. It was the greatest story we ever had. You know, and that was one of his favorite things. Anyway, we are going to segue. We'll be talking about Joe again. We're going to segue to our other topic here. I want to mention, first of all, that Paul Levitz was supposed to be on this panel. He wanted to be on it very badly at this convention, but he has a dying relative who he had to go take care of. He sends his regrets. He would have said wonderful, nice things about both men. I also want to mention, in case you're not aware, that immediately following this panel in this room, I'll be talking with the authors of 2 new books on Siegel and Schuster and on Bill Finger, about Siegel and Schuster and Bill Finger. Most of you probably are interested in those topics. You may want to stick around and hear us talk about 3 other great people in the history of comics. Now, Jerry Robinson. I wrote a lot about Jerry in the program book this year. I'm not going to stand up here and repeat all that, but he was a guy that I just had a hell of a lot of respect for as both an artist and as a human being. One of my favorite things I've done of all the panels and such is I got to interview Jerry at the Skirball Center for the Cultural Arts in Los Angeles, they were touring the Jerry Robinson collection. You know, we had a lot of compliments because Jerry saved stuff and got it together. And we went in and we had a wonderful celebrity-packed audience of people hearing Jerry talk about the history of comics. It was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. Jens, we want to say a little bit about Jerry. So what don't we know about him? Am I putting you on the spot? Yes.
I think you all know so much about Jerry. It's out there. Read Mark's program notes. Start with that.
Okay.
And I'll be around the convention and I can fill in any gaps.
I'm going to make a guess one question. We were talking earlier about how Jerry was not just a comic artist. He had a whole life. He had a family. He was a good family man. Could you talk a little bit about how he balanced those things? I mean, he worked very insane hours at times, right?
His entire career, yes. I don't really know how he did it, so I can't give you his tricks of the trade because it's still baffling to me how he managed all of the different things on his plate. But somehow he did, and he said the more you do, the more you can do. And I don't think that's good advice for everybody, but for him it worked. And he took on a lot. He obviously had to say no to here and there. But he ended up doing things that he loved his entire career, and that's how he did it. He had a passion for his work and for his life, which included his family and his outside of career passions such as painting and other arts.
Tell me that he understood how much he was loved and appreciated.
I believe he did.
Because he was the last time I saw him, he was on a little scooter. It was last year. He was going around, and I saw him going into the Marriott at the end of the convention. Maggie Thompson took a picture of us together, and I thought to myself, this is probably the last time I'm ever going to see Jerry. We hugged, and he was sitting on the scooter. We hugged awkwardly because I was bending over him and I'm clumsy. And I just wanted to say, we love you. I mean, I can say I, but it was we. We all did, all people in the business. Let's talk about what this man meant to us. Michael?
Yeah. I got to give you my 2 favorite Jerry stories. Jerry and I were very close, especially these last 10 years or so. It was the premiere of The Dark Knight in New York City. There was a special dinner beforehand, and we're at the dinner with a wonderful group of people. And I said to Jerry, who was there with his wonderful wife, I said, how are you getting over to the premiere? And he said, well, we'll go out here and catch a cab. I said, oh, no. I said, you're going to go in the limousine with us. So we got in the limo and we trekked over, and the fans were everywhere. The tumbler was outside. The red carpet seemed to stretch forever. There seemed to be 1,000 paparazzi and TV cameras. And as we get out, Jerry whispers to me, I'll go around the side and I'll meet you inside later. I said, no, sir, you are coming with me. And we got to the edge of the red carpet, and as loudly as I could, I said to all of the reporters, ladies and gentlemen, this is Jerry Robinson, the co-creator of The Joker. And then all the cameras start to move like this. The reporters with their microphones come at him. It took Jerry 35 minutes to get down the red carpet and get inside. We get inside, and my son David was documenting all of this with his little camera. I then took Jerry along with Bill Finger's granddaughter Athena, and one by one introduced them to every character that Jerry and or Bill Finger had co-created. So there was Danny DeVito. I said, Danny, meet the guy who co-created the Penguin. And he embraced him physically as well as emotionally. And then I took him to Aaron Eckhart. Aaron, meet the co-creator of Two-Face. And then it was Cillian Murphy in The Scarecrow. And it was Michael Caine as Alfred. And then ultimately to Christian Bale and Chris Nolan. And everyone just really poured out their affection and their thanks to Jerry for what he had done for so many years in obscurity under someone else's name, all the contributions that they had made. Last story I want to tell you was one of the last times Jerry and I did our Dog and Pony show. We had a great opportunity and we spoke together at the United Nations in New York. And Jerry got in front of a group of political cartoonists who were brought in from all over the world, primarily the Middle East, and was able to tell them, and they idolized him as if he was a rock star, believe me. And he was able to say, you have a talent, you have an ability. You have now chosen to use the greatest communication tool that the world has, the comic strip, the comic book, the cartoon panel. And you can entertain your audience, or you can also enlighten and educate your audience, and you have an opportunity to change your country, to change the world. And I say you don't simply have an opportunity, you have a responsibility to do this. And they all seriously embraced his message. It was one of the most powerful moments that I ever had, and that I was just absolutely privileged to share with Jerry Robinson.
Thank you, Mike. So that we don't piss off the moderator of the next panel, we have a 2-minute limit from your audience, gentlemen.
Okay, I first met Jerry when I interviewed him. I think I did the first published interview with him, though of course he had previously supplied a lot of the background materials for Jules Pfeiffer's The Great Comic Book Heroes in the early years of the industry, and also the strangle history of comics. But Jerry and I became very good friends, and I was later designated as colorist of choice on things like the comic book price tag cover, and I colored his Wit of the World Sunday feature. So I was over at Jerry's house a lot in the late 70s and the early 80s and such. And it was enlightening. I mean, it really expanded one's knowledge of what was happening in comic art worldwide, because one day I'd be delivering Sunday strips for Wit of the World to him, and he'd invite me to stay for dinner with dissident Soviet cartoonists who were there, and they were working for the police of some cartoonist back in Russia who was in prison for expressing his opinions. And Jerry, I always remember as, you know, there are a lot of comic book creators who fight for better treatment of creators as it pertains to themselves. Writers who want better, you know, rights for writers, etc. Jerry was a crusader when it came to helping others. Siegel and Schuster is the most common, you know, the best known case. But Jerry generally didn't go and fight for things that would help him, because Jerry had progressed. I mean, Jerry had done illustrations for Look magazine. He had done his Clubs and Fluff and Life with Robinson. Jerry, I think, dined at the White House with 3 different presidents as an editorial cartoonist. But Jerry would be fighting for the rights, you know, gathering the forces of the National Cartoonist Society, etc., to fight for comic artists in ways that did not benefit him personally. And that's, I think, something very special. A lot of us fight for better treatment for ourselves. Jerry really devoted, was pretty satisfied with his own life, and he really worked to look after people who were less fortunate. You know, Jerry had the talent to move beyond the bounds of comic books, as Joe Simon did, as Will Eisner did. But Jerry never forgot that, you know, the people he loved, and of course he was the living history of this business. So much of our memory of those early years of comic of the artists gathering together and turning out a Golden Age comic over a weekend because of some, paper under the cover ration paper deal, and gathering together, and in an apartment turning out a Golden Age comic book over a weekend. Those memories of this business and the early memories largely come from Jerry Robinson, and he was, the history of our business. He was the memory of our business, and very much the soul of our business.
Thank you. That's a very good point about Jerry fighting for other people. A lot of people think that English history got their pension solely because of Neil Adams' effort. I'm not taking away from Neil, but Jerry was the guy who went and actually negotiated the deal and firmed it up, and there was nothing in it for him, absolutely nothing. He wasn't even working in the comic field at the time. Neil got, not that he did it for this reason, Neil got a lot of credit in business, was respected more for it. Jerry didn't promote himself with that. People didn't know how much he had done. He had that quiet satisfaction that he had done the right thing by two guys there, but for the grace of God who I.
And it was finally Jerry Robinson worked out the deal with J. Emmett that God Siegel and Schuster's name were stored not just to the comic books, but to the movie credits. And
Anyway, Steve?
I've talked too much, so I apologize, but I'll be quick. Janice, I gotta say, that I'm being quick doesn't even begin to express the awe I have for your dad. He was just an amazing man. But I gotta say, when you met Jerry, when you stood and talked with him and his wife, you realized you were talking to a real gentleman and just an amazing individual. He was wonderful. I did have an occasion not long ago to be in Christopher Nolan's office. And in Chris Nolan's office, you've got a couple of the posters from his films and a couple of pieces of Jerry Robinson art. And that's what's on the walls. And it's amazing. He was amazing.
Paul?
We talked about last night. Last night, I went to dinner with Charlie, Chip Kidd, Bruce Timm, and Alan Burnett. We've all worked on Batman during his degrees. We've all taken our shots at the Joker character. And Charlie brought up the question of, what's the definitive, what's the Joker to you? What's the best Joker story ever done? And I said, I don't think it gets any better than that first time you ever see the character, which is, actually you don't even see the character. You just see a couple at home listening to the radio, and this voice, and they're very happy and all is content, and then this voice comes on and says, this is the Joker, tonight at midnight, this man will die. And Chip says, that's the power of the character, you just hear it in his voice. And we all agree that that first primal image that Jerry brought to it and worked with Bill Finger on, it never got better than that. There have been a lot of reinterpretations and redos and everything, but there's just something so powerful and so engaging about that very first encounter, that very first story, that it just set the pace for everything else. It's an amazing talent.
Charlie?
Yeah, Jens, I loved your dad, and I was really honored to be his friend. And we published the book, The Ambassador of Comics, the art book, at Abrams, and I was also at that UN show that Michael was at. It was really amazing to see all these cartoonists from all over the world who were just, probably in their countries, they were the Frank Noters or whoever, the Darwin Cooks of their place, and they were just in awe of Jerry, and they hung on everywhere, and afterwards they all kind of signed the book. It was a remarkable day. I was really honored to be there. I had a couple of just quick snapshot stories that I remember. One was when I was a kid, I read Flubs and Fluffs, which was a strip that was syndicated in New York in the Daily News, and I wrote, a letter and I submitted something, and I remember telling him that years later. He said, "Do you remember what it was?" And I told him. He said, "Yeah, that's not very good." And I was amazed that he was just honest. And, you'd think he'd be kind and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't do it." No, he was very honest. He was always honest. To the point when we went on the train once, we were coming back from Baltimore and came home from doing a signing there. This was about a year and a half ago. And we couldn't get a seat that would seat all three of us together, my wife and I and him. So we had to sit separately. And eventually, after a bunch of stops, 4 seats opened up so we could sit together. And he sat down next to us, and he was like, "Oh, thank God, that guy next to me was so annoying." And just as he said that, the guy came over and said, "Mister, you forgot your wallet." And walked away, and Jerry was like,
He's not.
I was so honored to get to know him and publish the book and just talk. And at every show, like Mark said, when he headed away in the scooter, every time we would see Jerry, and the book it wasn't. But I remember when he was getting ready for the procedure and going for a major procedure, he was like, "Oh, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll talk." And he also, how old he was or seemingly frail or whatever. I think he thought he was going to be around forever. I thought he was going to be around forever. And don't take these guys for granted. All these guys that are here who've been around for a long time. And it doesn't matter if they're in their 90s or 80s or if they're in their 50s or whatever. It goes by really quickly. So we're honored to work with these people and be friends with them and to be fans of theirs. So, go down to Artist Alley and appreciate it.
I know we're running out of time, but I wish my wife, Jackie Estrada, could be on this panel because she dealt with Jerry forming the Finger Award.
I didn't want any women on the panel.
I'm sorry.
I didn't want any women on the panel.
Wait until I tell Jackie that.
I would certainly have welcomed Jackie on the panel, I thought. But I asked her if you'd be on it, and she didn't suggest herself. So.
But anyway, your dad just treated her, just graciously when she was in New York and they discussed the fine-tuning that award, and he was always a gentleman, and he was incredibly kind to me, and he was just terrific. Like Charlie said, it's like these guys, Jerry, Joe, Eisner, and you think they're going to be around forever because they're so vibrant and very much alike. Even last year when your dad was clearly ailing, he was just still, his eyes lit up when we chatted with him, sharp as a tack, and it's like, don't take it for granted.
We're coming to the end of this here. I would like to point out a couple of things here. We've said it several times, let's not take the old-timers for granted, or for the new-timers for that matter, but the new-timers become old-timers in a hurry. And I also want to point out, I selected this day as I should have had, you're right, I should have had Jackie up here. And obviously there are other people who should have been up here, but we had a little number of seats. Partly because I thought you'd enjoy grand reminiscences, but also because I think it's important to acknowledge people who supported these guys. I mean, Charlie published a wonderful book of Jerry's work. Steve was not only helping publish Joe's Simon's work, he was protecting Joe. I mean, as savvy as Joe Simon was as a businessman, he still needed some guy there running interference for him, playing bad cop occasionally, playing good cop when necessary, and getting his work back into print. You have those wonderful Joe Simon new books, in part because of Steve. Tony was coloring these guys' work and was helping get to the conventions. And Michael, he told you the story about dragging Jerry in the front door at the premiere instead of the back door, where Jerry's natural instincts as a guy who sat at home drawing probably told him he should be. And we had to drag these guys out. And other people have written about them. And there's people out in the audience here, some of you know who you are, you could have been up here and talked about it the same way. And you want to feel with these guys you did right by them. It's important to us, I think, because they meant so much to us, and they didn't do it to become wealthy or famous. We have a generation now of people doing comics who may have thought, oh, if I can do a successful comic book, I could make $1 million, I could get a movie deal, I could be Todd McFarlane, whatever it is. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but there was another generation before them that never thought that stuff was possible. That really didn't get to sign their work, that merely thought they were getting a paycheck, and who still put more effort into the work than other guys getting the same page rate. I always thought it was amazing, when you saw some of the bad comic art, people would say, why is this guy so lousy? And if you look at what they were paid, the question is, why are the other guys so good? Because they weren't paid commensurate, they weren't rewarded. And frequently the reward for these guys was the satisfaction of doing the work right. Seeing it come out and having a pride in the artwork. And it's something which I think we need to hold on to because we lose it a little bit as the industry becomes more prosperous. It becomes possible, not likely necessarily, but possible to get rich doing comics. So I am going to, Mark, do you want to stick something else?
Yes. I wanted to mention that Jerry Robinson, and I know this because I worked with him, really was the person who first got comic art treated as art in museums. He did the Kennedy Center thing in 1976, I believe, for 5 or 6 months. But I knew Jerry was someone who, because of his credentials outside of the world of comic art, was able to talk and say, this stuff is art. And I wanted to make one more thing. One of the reasons Jerry was able to be so vital and do so much in his late 80s was he had a son who went to law school and then decided he wanted to get an intern for Jerry Syndicate and work with his son, Jens. And Jens, Jerry was just so glad to have his son at his side and working with him. And we owe, I'm sure, a lot of Jerry's appearances at Comic Con in recent years because of Jens' legwork and being there for his dad.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. That's very nice. I should mention that Jerry's work obviously lives on in so many ways, but he did manage to write his memoirs before he passed away, and that's to be published coming up maybe next year.
Jen, I was going to close by saying thank you for letting us play with him. He was a great toy. It was great to have around, and you know, we feel like a little extended part of the family because we got to know this man. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We're going to continue with the discussion with Siegel and Schuster. For those of you who want to stick around, and Bill Finger as well, I feel find it very enlightening. But we'll be jumping in. Thank you, these gentlemen.